They traveled deep into the Amazon rainforest to study rare life forms. But their drone captured something impossible beneath the canopy, a World War II aircraft wedged between massive trees. And what they found inside forever changed them, and the jungle itself. Watch till the end and comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. The next story will be even more shocking. The helicopter vanished into the mist like a swallowed memory, its fading echo dissolving into the heavy breath of the Amazon. When silence returned, it felt ancient, the kind that pressed on the skin rather than filled the air. Jamal Carter stood motionless beneath the towering green canopy, the straps of his backpack digging into his shoulders, as if the jungle itself were testing his resolve. Moisture clung to his face, warm and almost sticky, and every inhale tasted of soil older than civilizations. Beside him, Marcus Ellis tapped futilely at his wrist-mounted GPS. The tiny screen flickered, then smeared into a static blur as if the forest were swallowing its signal. "Nothing," Marcus muttered. "It's like the atmosphere just bends everything." Jamal wasn't surprised. They had been warned this region was an anomaly, a place where compasses spun, radios failed, and even seasoned guides refused to step. But to two field researchers hungry for discovery, that only made the assignment more tempting. Their expedition was supposed to be a simple grant-funded study on lichen colonies in high-canopy environments, nothing beyond meticulous plant sampling and drone surveys. Ordinary work, predictable work. But from the moment their boots hit the forest floor, nothing felt ordinary. The trees rose like pillars of a forgotten cathedral, roots writhing across the ground like ancient veins. The canopy shifted in slow, heavy breaths, swallowing sunlight until the world below glowed in muted greens and browns. Every movement around them, the buzz of insects, the rustle of unseen creatures, felt sharper, closer, never random. They set up camp on a rare dry ridge, unpacking equipment under the dim light that filtered through the branches. Jamal moved quietly, listening to the forest's pulse. It wasn't the typical heartbeat of nature. There was a deeper note beneath it, a resonance he couldn't name. Even the metal instruments in their kit began to tarnish within hours, a thin green film crawling across their surfaces as though the jungle rejected anything artificial. Marcus walked a wide perimeter, tying bright ribbons around trees to mark their boundaries. The neon color looked almost offensive against the natural palette. "Feels like we're drawing straight lines on something that hates straight lines," he said, half joking, half uneasy. For the rest of the day, they followed their planned schedule: drone mapping, humidity readings, canopy imaging. It should have been mind-numbing, procedural. Yet something was off. Jamal couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. Every time he paused, the forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. At dusk, the light didn't fade in the usual slow cascade. It simply vanished upward, as if the canopy swallowed it whole. Night arrived like a curtain falling. The temperature dropped sharply, and fog seeped between branches in ghostly tendrils. The hum of insects swelled until it felt like a vibration inside Jamal's bones. Marcus powered on their drone and sent it rising through the darkness. On the monitor inside the tent, they watched its small camera pierce layer after layer of foliage, capturing fragments of branches, mats of moss, and dizzying flashes of light. The feed glitched once, twice, then stabilized. Jamal leaned closer. Something metallic glimmered near the edge of the frame. At first it seemed like an illusion, a trick of the light. But as Marcus adjusted the angle, the reflection sharpened into a distinct line. Not bark, not a wet leaf, a smooth edge, a crafted edge, a wing. Jamal froze the feed and zoomed in. Despite decades of decay, despite the jungle's endless hunger, the object was unmistakably the fragment of an aircraft. narrow, symmetrical, coated in vines thick as ropes. Marcus stared in disbelief. No way. How would a plane even— The GPS signal dropped to 0. The drone's compass spun wildly on screen. Then the feed collapsed into static. The machine fell silent, lost somewhere in the labyrinth above. Jamal felt a cold twist in his stomach. The forest wasn't just hiding something, it was swallowing it. Night tightened around them like a second skin. As they lay in their hammocks, the jungle shifted into a new rhythm. Deep groans echoed through the trees, like wind passing across metal. Jamal tried to dismiss it as his imagination, yet the sound persisted, faint but deliberate. A low hum vibrated through the air, not mechanical, not natural, something in between. He slept lightly, drifting in and out as strange dreams pulled at him, roots writhing like serpents, leaves whispering like voices, a silver reflection flickering in the dark. When he jolted awake before dawn, his equipment bag was damp with condensation, and his skin cold despite the humid air. Marcus emerged from the shadows, rubbing his temples. "Did you hear that last night?" "The humming?" Jamal asked. "So it wasn't just me." Jamal replayed the final drone frame on his tablet. The grainy image of the wing flickered under his finger. Beneath layers of dirt and moss, he now noticed faint writing. Clean, block letters. U.S. Army. He felt the weight of it. History embedded in vines, a machine torn from its era and suspended in timeless green. A World War II aircraft buried not in earth, but in sky. Marcus exhaled slowly. "If that's real, we have to investigate." Protocol said they should return to base and report. Logic said the climb would be dangerous. But curiosity, old, reckless, irresistible, won. They gathered ropes, carabiners, and climbing gear. The sunlight broke through in fractured beams as they retraced the drone's last path. Bent ferns and fresh insect disturbances marked the route. Every few minutes, Jamal glimpsed a flicker of dull silver high above, like a ghost trapped between branches. As they pressed deeper, the hum returned, soft at first, then unmistakable. It didn't vibrate through the air. It resonated through the ground. Finally, they reached a cluster of colossal trees. Their trunks soared upward like titans, merging with the canopy. And there, cradled horizontally between them, wrapped in vines and moss, was the aircraft. Fully intact, suspended 50 meters above the jungle floor. Jamal's breath stopped. Marcus whispered, barely audibly, "That thing shouldn't be here." The forest fell silent as if listening with them. A breeze stirred, and the aircraft groaned, a low metallic sigh, like a creature waking in its sleep. A single flake of rust drifted down and landed on Jamal's arm. Whatever story the plane carried, it was not a forgotten wreck. It felt aware. The chapter ends with both men staring at the impossible relic above, the forest holding its breath, as though waiting for them to climb. The climb began just after dawn, when the mist had thinned enough for sunlight to drip between the leaves like melting gold. Jamal tightened the straps of his harness and wiped his palms against his pants, though the humidity made it pointless. Marcus checked the ropes again and again, his movements sharp and mechanical, his mind locked on the impossible sight above them. The aircraft, a relic of a war long gone, hung between two colossal sabas, as if the jungle itself had lifted it into place and refused to let it fall. The previous night lingered in Jamal's thoughts. The hum, the way the trees had trembled ever so slightly, the strange cold breath seeping from the direction of the wreck. None of it made sense, yet all of it felt connected to the machine above. He looked up, following the line of vines to where the fuselage glinted faintly through layers of green. "Ready?" Marcus called. Jamal nodded, and they began. The Sabas were ancient giants, their trunks wider than a man could wrap his arms around. The bark felt warm beneath Jamal's hands, alive in a way wood shouldn't be. Ants scurried across it in frantic patterns, disturbed by the ropes or by something deeper in the forest. As they climbed higher, the air grew cooler, thinner, and the forest floor dissolved into a tapestry of shifting greens below. Halfway up, Jamal paused on a natural platform formed by thick intersecting branches. He glanced down and felt his stomach lurch. The drop was immense, a vertical ocean of leaves. Marcus was already climbing ahead, his figure silhouetted against the light, dwarfed by the titanic trees. Above him, the metallic curve of the fuselage slowly emerged from the web of vines. Up close, the plane looked both ancient and strangely intact. Moss blanketed its sides like a patchwork quilt, but the structure beneath was whole. The faded symbol of the U.S. Army Air Forces stretched across part of the wing, a white star within a blue circle, worn but undeniable. Rust formed streaks that looked like tears running down its sides. Marcus reached the underside of the fuselage first. When his boot touched the metal, a hollow, resonant sound echoed through the canopy, too deep, too alive for something that had been dead for 80 years. Jamal felt the vibration through the trunk beneath him. "This is insane," Marcus whispered, his voice trembling despite the attempt to sound steady. Jamal joined him moments later, hooking into the anchor points they had set. The fuselage loomed above them, like a steel whale caught in nets of vines. The jungle had not destroyed it. It had embraced it. They circled carefully around the plane's body, inspecting its seams, its dents, the places where trees had grown through shattered panels. The cargo hatch was sealed tight, rusted shut after decades of storms and silence. Only the emergency exit near the cockpit remained slightly ajar, held open by a thick vine that had forced its way between the frame and the door. Jamal reached for the edge of the hatch. His fingers brushed cold metal, slick with moisture. It did not budge. Marcus positioned himself beside him, bracing his feet against a curve of the fuselage. Together they wedged a climbing pick into the narrow gap. The metal groaned, a long, pained sound, almost mournful, and flakes of rust drifted down like reddish snow. "Again," Marcus said. They pushed. The vines snapped. The door jerked open with a sudden gasp of stale air that rushed past them, cold enough to sting their faces. It smelled of oil, rot, and something faintly metallic, like old blood left too long in a sealed room. Flashlights cut through the darkness inside. A narrow corridor slanted downward, the walls coated in layers of dust and mold. Seats lined one side, their fabric rotted away until only skeletons of metal remained. Control cables dangled from the ceiling in tangled threads. It felt less like stepping into a wreck and more like entering a tomb preserved by time and the forest. Jamal climbed inside first, every movement cautious. The air felt heavy, unmoving, pressing against his chest. Marcus followed, his flashlight sweeping across broken glass, twisted dials, and the eerie stillness of a place abandoned in a moment of terror. The cockpit was a frozen snapshot of catastrophe. The pilot's seat was knocked off its bolts, wedged against the warped control panel. Moss crept over the instruments like a living shroud. The co-pilot's seat sagged under the weight of years. Jamal ran his light across the dashboard and saw fingerprints etched into the corrosion, desperate marks preserved like fossils. He moved toward the rear. Here the silence grew thicker. Crates filled the cargo bay, stacked from floor to ceiling. Some were shattered, their contents lost to time. Others remained perfectly sealed despite the decades. Each bore faded stencils, numbers, codes, and a recurring label. C9. Marcus knelt beside a small plaque fixed to the wall and brushed it clean with his glove. Project Albatross, he read aloud in a whisper. Classified cargo. Jamal's skin prickled beneath his clothes. The plane wasn't just a transport. It was part of a mission erased from the known history of the war. As Marcus examined the crates, Jamal noticed a faint vibration beneath his feet, so soft he questioned whether he imagined it. The fuselage let out a low, almost grieving creak. Sunlight flickered through tiny cracks in the walls, casting shifting patterns of gold and green across the dusty bay. They spent what felt like hours documenting the interior. Photographs, notes, measurements. The deeper they went, the more Jamal felt the forest pressing around the plane, as if listening, as if reacting to their intrusion. When they finally stepped back toward the hatch, dusk had painted the canopy in muted tones of amber. Outside, the jungle's hum was lower now, slower, as though it had synchronized itself with the ancient machine embedded in its branches. Jamal paused at the threshold, looking back into the dim corridor of the aircraft. The crates, the plaque, the eerie stillness, the faint tremor beneath the floor. Everything inside felt like it had been waiting. He and Marcus secured their ropes and moved toward the trunk to begin their descent. As they did, the vines wrapped around the fuselage tightened ever so slightly, shifting the metal with a soft, deliberate groan, like the plane was adjusting to new weight. A single flake of rust drifted past Jamal's cheek. The forest was watching. They reached the ground exhausted, drenched in sweat, resin, and something colder that neither could name. In the dim glow of their campfire, the camera lay between them, filled with evidence of an impossible discovery. Jamal stared into the flames, replaying every detail of the wreck in his mind. The sealed crates, the cryptic codes, the unnatural hum in the metal. Something inside that plane wasn't just forgotten by time. It felt alive in a way that made the air itself seem changed. And as night settled around them, the forest exhaled a long, slow breath, a sound that echoed faintly like a metallic sigh coming from somewhere high above. They didn't sleep much that night. The jungle shifted through its usual cycles of noise and silence, but neither Jamal nor Marcus could stop replaying the images from the aircraft in their minds. The crates stamped C9, the plaque reading Project Albatross, the way the fuselage seemed to vibrate as if it still remembered motion. Every time Jamal closed his eyes, he saw the cargo bay again, the stacked containers like coffins waiting to be opened. At first light, the air felt unusually cold. Mist clung low to the ground, coiling around roots and gear like a living thing. The trees were silhouettes in pale gray, their crowns lost in a ceiling of white. Jamal sat by the dim glow of the camp stove and stared up into the canopy where he knew the plane hung, unseen but present. "We bring it down today," Marcus said quietly, voice rough from lack of sleep. Jamal didn't ask what it was. They both knew. The capsule, the object that had felt like the center of the aircraft's gravity. They had only glimpsed it briefly the day before, tucked behind the crates. Its cylindrical walls clouded with age, a faint amber sheen inside. Enough to see the shape suspended within, not quite insect, not quite machine. Now it was all either of them could think about. They climbed again. The ascent was slower this time, their muscles already aching from the day before. The ropes creaked softly as they pulled themselves upward, hauling equipment along the line. The mist thickened as they rose, and beads of water clung to their harnesses, their helmets, their lashes. When they reached the fuselage, the air leaking from the open hatch bit at their faces, cool and still, another climate trapped inside the shell of metal. The cargo bay felt different. The silence was heavier, the smell of rust sharper. Jamal swept his flashlight across the stacked crates until the beam settled on the capsule. It rested half-hidden in a corner, braced by a collapsed crate. The cylindrical glass, or whatever material it truly was, had yellowed with age. Fissures webbed its surface, but it remained intact. Inside, the amber fluid shimmered faintly in the light, and within that, something dark enfolded. The specimen. Jamal felt the small hairs on his arms rise beneath his sleeves. "Let's take it slow," Marcus said, kneeling beside the capsule. "We document everything. We don't break anything, and we don't open anything. Agreed?" "Agreed." They photographed the capsule from every angle. They measured its dimensions, noted the metal bands reinforcing its ends, recorded the faded military stencils curling along its sides. Numbers, codes, a small, almost invisible stamp near the base. C9, the same designation as the crates. They rigged a sling around it, hands moving with practiced familiarity despite the tension. The capsule was heavier than it looked when they tested the straps, its weight awkward and unyielding. Every shift caused the amber fluid inside to sway sluggishly. For a moment, Jamal thought the dark shape at the center moved on its own, independent of the fluid, like something adjusting position in sleep. He blinked and dismissed it as imagination. With painstaking care, they maneuvered the capsule through the narrow corridor, out the emergency hatch, and out onto the fuselage's spine. From there, they secured it to a pulley system anchored around a thick branch, slowly lowering it through the lattice of vines toward the forest floor. It descended like a strange, ancient heart returning to the ground. By the time they climbed down after it, the mist had begun to thin. Patches of pale sunlight broke through as they cleared a space in the camp. They unfurled reflective sheeting and erected a small, makeshift labo-low, transparent plastic dome supported by aluminum rods, just large enough for 2 men, their instruments, and the capsule. Inside, the world felt muffled. The sounds of the jungle filtered through as vague murmurs. The air was warmer, yet the space hummed with clinical sterility thanks to the gleam of metal tools and the glow of portable lamps. The capsule sat in the center, beaded with condensation, its presence dominating the small enclosure. Jamal crouched in front of it, notebook balanced on his knee. The amber liquid inside was clearer at this proximity. Suspended within it was the thing that had haunted his dreams, a creature no larger than his hand, wings folded tight around a narrow body. At first glance it resembled an insect, but its structure betrayed its wings almost crystalline, laced with impossibly fine metallic veins. Joints too precise, too symmetric to be organic. It sat there, motionless, as if frozen mid-flight. Marcus adjusted the UV lamp, angling it toward the cylinder. Pale light washed over the specimen, and for a brief second, the metallic filaments in its wings flickered. Jamal's breath caught. "Did you see that?" he asked. "Could have been refraction," Marcus said, his voice calm but too quick. "The fluid's viscous. Light behaves weird in it." Jamal didn't answer. He just kept staring. The anomalies began small. The first device to fail was the atmospheric monitor. It flickered, hummed, then went dead despite fresh batteries. Then their radiation sensor began to spit out numbers that made no sense, jumping wildly, then dropping to 0. The handheld EM reader froze for several seconds, then rebooted itself. Outside, the jungle grew quiet. No slow chorus of insects, no distant shrieks of hidden birds, no rustling of unseen creatures in the underbrush. The sudden silence was so complete that the faint hum of their own equipment grew oppressive. Marcus shot Jamal a glance. "We've worked near volcanic vents, in magnetic anomalies, in storm systems. I've never seen this many instruments fail at once." Jamal swallowed, throat dry. Maybe it's just interference from the plane above, or metal saturation in the area, or... He stopped. He could hear it now. A low, steady sound beneath the quiet. Too pure to be wind, too controlled to be coincidence. It seeped through the ground, through the plastic walls of their shelter, through the soles of their boots. A hum, faint but precise. A single sustained note just on the edge of perception. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. Marcus hesitated, then nodded once. "Yeah, I was hoping you didn't." They tried to distract themselves with work. Jamal took swabs from the exterior of the capsule, sealed them carefully into labeled vials. Marcus recorded temperatures, watching as the readings dropped inside the dome despite the humid heat just outside. Every time the hum deepened, the temperature fell by a fraction of a degree. By late afternoon, the trees surrounding their camp seemed to press closer. Vines hung lower. Leaves shivered in non-existent wind. The sky overhead shrank into a narrow ring of pale gray framed by overlapping canopy. Jamal felt as if they'd set their lab in the heart of something watching them with slow, patient interest. "Let's take a break," Marcus said finally. "We should go through the logs again. Maybe there's something we missed." They stepped out of the dome, sealing it behind them. The immediate warmth of the jungle hit like a physical force. Jamal sank onto a fallen log, the field journal from the cockpit balanced in his hands. The pages were brittle, stained with water and age, but the ink had survived. They had skimmed it the day before, but now every line felt urgent. Routine entries filled the first half: weather conditions, fuel levels, coordinates. A pilot's neat, professional handwriting. Then the tone shifted. Altitude adjustment, cargo instability, unidentified vibration in hull, radio interference. Further down, a line underlined twice caught Jamal's eye. Cargo C9 compromised. Containment holding but unstable. He read on. No safe landing zone near base. Orders. Divert to unpopulated region. Avoid all settlements. Maintain altitude over jungle. The final entry was almost illegible, the letters jagged, slanting wildly down the page. Containment failing. Unknown response. No safe landing. Jungle below. God help us. Jamal's skin went cold. He looked up, meeting Marcus's eyes. They weren't transporting this thing. They were trying to get rid of it. Marcus stared past him toward the capsule, barely visible through the transparent walls of the dome. So they flew it over the only place big enough to swallow it. "The forest," Jamal said softly. "They wanted it to disappear here." As if summoned by the words, the hum grew louder. It rolled through the ground in slow, deliberate waves. The plastic of the dome shivered. The reflective sheeting rippled as though wind had passed, though the air around them was still. Jamal could feel the sound in his teeth, in the bones of his face. Light shifted at the edge of his vision. At first he thought it was fireflies, but their movement was wrong. Tiny points of golden light flickered among the trees, emerging from the undergrowth like embers rising from invisible flames. They moved in arcs and spirals, synchronized in patterns too deliberate for random flight. "Those aren't insects," Marcus said, voice thin. The lights pulsed in unison with the hum. Jamal watched, transfixed. The forest seemed to breathe in time with the rhythm. Leaves trembled, branches dipped, and the glow traced faint lines along the roots on the ground, almost like veins. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, the lights sank back into the shadows and vanished. The hum faded to a whisper. Jamal realized he'd been holding his breath. He forced air into his lungs, his chest tight. Inside the dome, the capsule glowed faintly in the dim light. They returned to it cautiously, like approaching an altar. The temperature inside had dropped several more degrees. Their breath fogged the clear plastic walls, ghostly echoes of their presence. The amber liquid inside the capsule was no longer uniform. Where it had once been a cloudy, consistent hue, it now swirled in subtle gradients, dark gold pooling near the center, lighter shades along the edges. The creature within it was less distinct, its outlines softened. Its folded wings seemed to have partially unfurled, the metallic veins stretched like a hand reaching outward through syrup. Jamal's heart hammered. "We haven't touched the seal," Marcus said, more to himself than to Jamal. "We didn't change anything." "That's not true," Jamal whispered. "We moved it. We brought it down. We're shining lights at it, measuring it. We woke it up." The hum deepened once more. This time Jamal didn't just hear it, he felt it press against his skin, sliding under it like cold water. His fingers tingled as he placed his hand lightly against the outer casing. It was colder than any environment they could reasonably justify with damaged insulation and ambient temperature. And beneath the smooth surface, he felt movement. Not a physical jolt, not a crack. Just the faintest suggestion of a push from the inside, as if something had drifted toward his touch and met it. He jerked his hand back, breath sharp. "Don't touch it again," Marcus snapped. Jamal nodded, but his eyes stayed locked on the capsule. The amber fluid had begun to thicken, gathering in slow spirals around the dissolving body of the specimen. Its distinct form blurred into threads. Filaments no larger than hairs, each one glowing faintly as they intertwined. The shape at the center fragmented, losing its boundaries, becoming a network of golden veins suspended in liquid. "Are you seeing this?" Marcus asked, his voice flat with disbelief. "It's breaking down," Jamal said, "or reorganizing." Tiny fractures appeared along the base of the casing, not enough to shatter. Just hairline cracks, like the first lines on ice under pressure. Through them, droplet-sized beads of amber seeped out, clinging to the metal ring before dropping onto the reflective sheeting below. The hum grew steady, almost calm now. Jamal watched as one droplet spread across the foil in a thin circle. It glowed softly, then began to split, forming branching lines like roots searching for soil. A second droplet landed near the first, its branching pattern bent toward the other, and when they touched, they merged, forming a larger, more complex shape. "Marcus," Jamal whispered, "it's spreading." Marcus swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the growing pattern. "We need to contain it." "How?" Jamal asked. He already knew the answer. The capsule hadn't just preserved the specimen, it had held it in suspension, paused between states. Now, whatever had been trapped inside was waking, dissolving, and reaching for the world outside. They stared in silence as more droplets formed, each one slipping through microscopic cracks, each one landing, glowing, branching across the sheeting. The patterns grew more intricate with every second, spreading toward the edges of the dome, seeking a way out. Outside, the jungle was silent again. But beneath that silence, the forest listened. And within the small artificial shelter at its heart, the thing that Project Albatross had tried to bury was no longer sleeping. It was moving slowly, deliberately, toward the soil. The morning began with a tremor, not a violent one, not the kind that split the ground or sent boulders crashing through the forest. This one was subtle, almost gentle, a slow shifting of weight somewhere high above. At first Jamal thought it was wind, until he realized the leaves weren't moving, the trees weren't swaying. The tremor came from something suspended in the canopy. Marcus was already outside the dome, staring upward with a look Jamal had never seen on his face, a mixture of dread and calculation. "It's the plane," Marcus said quietly. "It's moving." Jamal stepped beside him, following his gaze. The massive shape of the Yobowi aircraft, half swallowed by vines and branches, shifted again. A groaning echo rolled through the canopy, like the moan of an awakening beast. Rust flakes rained down in faint spirals. "Something changed its weight distribution," Marcus whispered. "Or the trees can't hold it anymore." But Jamal knew the truth neither of them wanted to voice. It wasn't gravity. It wasn't decay. The hum they'd heard for hours, that low, increasingly resonant pulse coming from the capsule, had not been an isolated phenomenon. The plane wasn't failing. The forest was responding. The groan deepened. Vines strained. A branch snapped somewhere above them, followed by a harsh crack that made Jamal's chest tighten. More rust fell, but this time in sheets, like metallic snow. "Get back," Marcus said. But Jamal didn't move. The entire canopy seemed to inhale. Leaves trembled in a ripple that traveled outward in all directions, like the shockwave from a silent explosion. Birds erupted out of the trees in panicked flocks. Monkeys howled somewhere in the distance. Even the insects, usually relentless in their noise, went eerily still. Then the vines finally gave way. The aircraft lurched. It hung for a split second in impossible suspension, groaning like metal remembering movement, and then the jungle let go. The sound was colossal. Metal screamed as the wreck fell through the branches, tearing vines and limbs apart. The ground shook as the plane slammed into the earth in a cloud of soil and shattered debris. The shockwave knocked Jamal backward, the air punching out of his lungs. Marcus barely avoided being crushed by a falling trunk. For several seconds, there was only dust. Dust and the ringing in Jamal's ears. When the world returned, he dragged himself upright, coughing. The cargo dome was still intact, though its surface was now webbed with cracks. A long tear in the rainforest floor ran from the fallen aircraft to the dome's edge, as if the forest itself had exhaled a violent breath. Marcus stumbled to his feet. "We need to check the capsule." Jamal nodded, though dread twisted in his stomach. Inside the dome, the cracks in the capsule had multiplied. The casing was no longer merely fractured. It looked as though something inside had pushed outward, spiderwebbing the entire surface with glowing veins. The amber fluid swirled violently. The branching droplets on the foil pulsed in response, their patterns now stretched toward the soil beneath the dome. And then the final crack appeared, a sharp, clear sound, like ice snapping on a frozen lake. The casing split down its center. The amber liquid spilled out with startling force, splashing across the floor in a sheet of gold. The glowing filaments within it moved like living threads, swirling, crawling, seeking. The specimen's dissolved form spread itself in branching patterns, each one unfurling like the roots of a sprouting tree. "Don't touch it!" Marcus shouted. Jamal didn't need the warning. The substance was already moving on its own. It flowed under the reflective sheeting, following the tear in the soil created by the crash. The ground drank it greedily. Every drop sank into the earth, disappearing into the root systems beneath. The dome vibrated. A low hum resonated through the rods and plastic, not coming from the capsule anymore, but from the ground itself. The forest was waking. Marcus backed away. "We have to leave. Now." But they were already too late to simply walk away. It began at the fallen aircraft. Roots split open, fracturing like ribs. Thin metallic threads rose from the soil, impossibly delicate, hair-like strands glinting with a faint golden shimmer. They wove themselves around broken branches, crawling up tree trunks, embedding themselves in bark like veins knitting flesh. The trees shuddered. Leaves brightened into unnatural shades of luminous green. Some edges tinged gold. Others pulsed faintly, like bioluminescent creatures breathing in unison. The forest canopy rippled as if controlled by a single, unified heartbeat. "Marcus," Jamal whispered hoarsely. "The capsule wasn't the cargo. The forest is the container." Metallic filaments erupted across the ground, binding soil into lattices. The fallen aircraft groaned again, not from decay, but from transformation. The golden threads spread across its hull, merging with the metal, restoring fractures like a wound, healing in reverse. "It's repairing the plane," Marcus said, voice cracking. "It's merging with everything." But the transformation didn't stop with the environment. A faint, glittering dust hung in the air, shimmering like powdered metal. Jamal felt it land on his arms, cold and almost sharp against his skin. He brushed at it instinctively, but the dust clung, seeping into his pores. He gasped, feeling a tingling numbness spread across his forearms. The faint outline of veins beneath his skin glowed for a moment, a subtle gold, pulsing in rhythm with the hum spreading through the ground. "Marcus!" He held out his arms. Marcus stared, horrified. "It's inside you." "You too," Jamal replied. Marcus looked down. Tiny flickers of gold traced along his fingers. The forest was claiming them. The hum intensified. Roots jerked, twisting like awakened serpents. The ground convulsed under the spreading substance, sending shocks through the soil. Trees leaned toward the dome as if drawn by magnetism or hunger. "We need to go," Marcus said again. But now it wasn't a command. It was a plea. They grabbed what equipment they could and sprinted through the warped undergrowth. The forest resisted, vines slithering across their path, branches lowering like arms trying to grasp them. The metallic dust thickened, coating everything, swirling in small spirals as if directed by invisible currents. Several times Jamal felt the ground bulge beneath his boots, reacting to his steps, like a living organism responding to stimuli. Their breath grew ragged, every inhale tasting faintly metallic. Their hearts pounded, but disturbingly the hum in the forest matched their pulse, syncing, adjusting, learning them. When they burst into a clearing, the sudden flood of sunlight felt unreal. Above, the sound of rotor blades chopped through the air. Their evacuation team had arrived, summoned earlier by Marcus when the capsule first began to split. The helicopter hovered, struggling to find a landing spot among the shifting foliage. Jamal waved frantically as Marcus fired the emergency flare. The clearing ground writhed, metallic veins spread through the grass, turning it rigid and reflective. The hum swelled. Trees leaned inward, as if trying to reclaim them before they could escape. "Move!" Marcus shouted. The helicopter touched down for barely a second, just enough. They dove inside. The pilot shouted something they couldn't hear over the roar of rotors. The aircraft lifted unevenly, swaying as tendrils of vine lashed at its skids. Then they were airborne. Below them, the forest glowed. Not from sunlight, but from the golden network now embedded in its soil, its trunks, its branches. The entire canopy pulsed like a single, massive organism, breathing in slow, terrifying waves. Jamal pressed his trembling hands against the helicopter window, watching the living forest recede. He saw the golden dust on his skin. He felt its cold pulse beneath the surface. He felt the hum inside him. The forest had not just awakened, it had marked them both, marked them as part of itself. And as the helicopter carried them away, the glowing canopy of the Amazon looked up at them, as if aware, as if alive, as if remembering the men who had brought the heart of Project Albatross back to the ground. The hum stayed with him all the way home. Even after the helicopter lifted them above the glowing canopy and the jungle shrank into a rippling green sea below, Jamal could still feel it, a faint vibration under his skin, matching his heartbeat. The others in the chopper shouted over the rotors, voices sharp with urgency and relief, but their words slid past him like wind. He kept his eyes fixed on the forest as it receded, watching the subtle lines of silver and gold threading through the trees like veins in a colossal body. From this height it looked almost peaceful. It wasn't. Hospitals came next. Fluorescent lights, sterilized air, and the distant beeping of machines that somehow sounded weaker than the hum that had followed him out of the jungle. Jamal and Marcus were isolated for observation, as one doctor put it, the phrase delivered with a careful neutrality that said everything it wasn't allowed to say. They drew blood, swabbed their skin, scanned their lungs. Jamal watched tubes fill with his own dark red, expecting to see flecks of gold swirling inside. The vials looked normal, but the doctors' faces didn't. They frowned. They whispered outside the door. They never answered questions directly. The metallic dust that had coated his arms was gone by then, washed away in a dozen frantic scrubs and antiseptic swabs. But the faint tingling remained beneath the surface, like a memory lodged in the nerves. At night, when the machines quieted, he would lie awake staring at the ceiling and feel the echo of the forest, the slow, measured hum that had sunk into the soil, into the trunks, into their bones. It hadn't left. It had just grown quieter. Months blurred. Debriefings followed the hospital, first with university officials, then with men who never offered their names and never wrote anything down when they questioned him. They asked about the plane, about the capsule, about the substance inside. They asked for coordinates, timestamps, descriptions of the symptoms they'd felt. Every time Jamal mentioned the word alive, their expressions closed, like doors slamming shut. "You encountered an unknown contaminant," one of them said flatly. "Your perception may have been affected. Trauma can distort memory." "Trauma didn't make the trees glow," Jamal replied. The man simply stared at him until the silence became an answer. Bits of information leaked through the cracks of their careful control. Project Albatross had a file. It had never been officially terminated. The crash had been known to some parties decades ago. There were references to experimental biomaterials, advanced for their time, classified permanently. But every time he asked who knew, who approved, why it was still buried, the responses turned into a wall of phrases. Above your clearance, need-to-know basis, national security, global stability. The university rescinded his field license. Their research grant was quietly revoked for protocol violations and unauthorized risk exposure. The official notice never mentioned the plane, or the capsule, or the way the forest had changed when they tried to burn the substance. It spoke only of breach of safety guidelines and failure to follow evacuation protocols. Marcus stopped fighting sooner than Jamal did. At first, in those sterile conference rooms, Marcus sat upright beside him, backing his account with the same calm precision he'd used to catalog insect species. He used numbers. He used frequencies. He used exact times when the instruments had failed, when the hum had spiked, when the metallic filaments had appeared in the soil. Then, slowly, his sentences grew shorter. By the time the interviews became interrogations, Marcus answered only what was asked. Yes, no, coordinates, times, temperatures. His eyes drifted past his questioners, unfocused, as though listening to something just beyond the walls. On their last day together in the facility, Jamal found him sitting in the corner of their shared room, staring at his own hands under the dim lamp. "Do you still feel it?" Jamal asked. Marcus didn't look up. "You don't stop feeling your own heartbeat," he said. "You just get used to it." "Whatever we woke up." "We didn't wake it up," Marcus interrupted. Now he did look up. His eyes were bloodshot, but clear. "They did, a long time ago. We just reminded it. The world is still here." The next morning, they were discharged separately. Jamal stepped out into sunlight that felt wrong, too clean, too silent, too shallow after the layered depths of the Amazon. They handed him a thin envelope with his name on it and a warning not to discuss classified elements of the expedition with anyone. Marcus didn't appear. "He's under extended observation," one of the men in suits said when Jamal asked. "That's all you need to know." Days later, Jamal went to his apartment. The door was unlocked. The lights were off. Inside, everything remained neatly in place. Books lined up, notebooks stacked, bed made with military precision. Only one thing was different. On the kitchen table lay a single open journal, a pen still resting on the crease. The pages were filled with 3 words, written over and over, line after line in Marcus's handwriting. "It remembers us." No one ever filed a missing person report. No one ever answered when Jamal asked where Marcus had been taken, or if he had left willingly, or if he was even still alive. There was always another form to sign, another reminder that he had already said more than he should. In the end, the world moved on. Jamal tried to. He returned to Atlanta. His apartment felt smaller than he remembered, the city louder but somehow less alive. Traffic hummed outside his window. Buildings towered in orderly grids. People rushed down sidewalks with headphones in and eyes down. Everything was predictable, mapped, controlled. But when storms rolled in, when thunder rumbled far away and the wind pressed against the glass, the familiar city noises blended into something else. A low, steady hum, not as loud as in the forest, not as deep, but it was there, like an echo carried through metal and concrete. It rose through the floorboards when heavy rain fell. It seeped through the radiator pipes at night. It lived in the spaces between sounds. He told himself it was the city. He didn't believe himself. The letter arrived a year later. Plain envelope. No sender's name. No postage mark he recognized. Just his address, printed neatly in black ink. Inside was a single sheet of thick gray paper with one line typed in the center. "Do not speak. It is contained." Below the sentence, printed in smaller text, was a string of numbers. Latitude, longitude. He didn't have to look them up to know what they were. Coordinates, not of the crash site, those he had burned into his memory long ago. This point lay hundreds of miles away, deeper into the Amazon, far from their original camp. A new location, a new center. He sat at his desk for a long time with the letter in his hands, staring at the word contained until it lost meaning. The phrase could have been a reassurance. It didn't feel like one. He folded the letter, tucked it inside his old field notebook, and tried to pretend it had never come. The dream started after that. He was back in the forest every night, but not the way it had been on the day they arrived. The canopy pulsed with veins of light. The sabas glowed along their trunks like lit columns. The ground beneath his feet was threaded with metallic roots that shifted as he walked. Sometimes the plane hung above him again, frozen in the trees. Sometimes it was gone, and in its place grew a mound, smooth, cocoon-like, breathing. Each time he woke, his hands felt numb, as if something cold had been holding them. He told no one. He taught a few small classes as an adjunct, guest lectured when the university needed someone to fill a slot, wrote papers that skirted the edges of what he really knew. Symbiosis in extreme climates, adaptive fungal networks, the boundary between decay and life. He never mentioned the word albatross. He never mentioned C9. Yet the hum remained. It was faint on most days, a pressure just under hearing. But when news reports talked about unprecedented droughts and wildfires in rainforests thousands of miles away, or about strange electromagnetic disturbances interfering with satellites, it grew louder just for a moment, as if in response. One night, unable to sleep, He pulled his old field notebook from the back of his closet. The cover was still stained with jungle damp and river mud. The last full entry stared up at him. The jungle is remembering. The ink had bled where rain had soaked the page after their final sprint to the river, but the words were still legible. Beneath them, in smaller letters written later, he had scribbled 3 more words. And so am I. As he turned the pages, something small and hard slipped out and fell onto the floor with a faint click. He froze. It was a shard of resin, no bigger than his thumbnail. Faintly translucent, amber-tinted, with a single metallic filament trapped inside it like a frozen vein. He didn't remember pocketing it. He certainly didn't remember bringing it home. For a long moment he just stared at it, small and silent on the wooden boards. The city hummed distantly outside his window, traffic lights changing, air conditioners rattling, generators murmuring. He picked it up. It was colder than it had any right to be. He held it between his fingers and turned it toward the light. The filament inside wasn't totally still. It seemed to catch the glow and bend it, reflecting not just brightness but pattern. For an instant, Jamal thought he saw the faint outline of wings again, folded tight. Then the image broke apart into threads. The shard pulsed, just once, so faintly that he might have imagined it. A tiny flicker of light synchronized with the beating in his chest. Every sound in the apartment dimmed. The hum rose. It didn't come from the shard alone. It came from the walls, from the floor, from the metal pipes threading through the building, from the distant power lines humming outside. For a heartbeat, it felt as though the entire structure around him had synchronized with a rhythm he recognized all too well. The same rhythm that had moved through the forest floor. The same rhythm that had pulsed through the capsule. The same rhythm that had spread into the roots, the trunks, the insects, the storm. He closed his fingers around the shard, gripping it so tightly his knuckles whitened. Outside his window, the streetlights dimmed for a second. The city went almost quiet, as if holding its breath. Then the lights flared back to full strength. Cars passed. Someone laughed on the sidewalk below. A siren wailed in the distance. Normal. Everything was normal. Except for the echo in his bones. He didn't sleep that night. He sat by the window with the shard in front of him on the table, watching the city lights flicker and steady, flicker and steady. Every time thunder rolled on a faraway horizon, the filament inside the resin seemed to catch some invisible current, glinting almost imperceptibly. He thought of Marcus's notebook, the repeated phrase, the ink carved into the page like an obsession. It remembers us. Somewhere far away, beneath the endless canopy of the Amazon, the forest was still breathing. The sabas still stood, their trunks threaded with silver veins. The soil still carried traces of golden filaments, spreading, adapting, integrating with everything that touched them. Project Albatross had not failed. It had completed its mission in a way no one had planned. They had meant to build a weapon. They had created an organism. They had tried to bury it in the deepest part of the largest forest on Earth, trusting distance and silence to be enough. Time had done the rest. Jamal reached out and touched the shard with the tip of his finger. The filament gleamed faintly. For a moment, he could have sworn he heard his name whispered within the hum, not in words, not in any language he knew, but in the rising and falling of tone that felt unmistakably like recognition. The jungle was remembering, and somewhere in that vast, breathing network of trees and roots and metal and memory, it had not forgotten the 2 men who had climbed into the dead plane in its canopy and carried its heart back to the ground. If you listened closely enough, past the traffic, past the human noise, past the thin buzz of power lines, you could almost hear it, a low, patient sound traveling under the skin of the world. Waiting, learning, growing, remembering. What happened in the Amazon remains classified. The scientists survived, but the secret of that organism and the forest itself still lives beneath the canopy. And sometimes it feels like the jungle still remembers them. If you want a sequel or more hidden truth stories, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe. The most incredible stories are yet to come.